Electric refrigerators were still a ways off during the 1900s, but the average person did have access to an icebox, which is an earlier precursor to the refrigerator. The icebox was a large box with lots of insulation, which would help keep the ice from melting. There were doors allowing access to the inside of the icebox, typically one for the ice block and one for the food items. A tube leading from a drip pan under the ice block to a tray, which could be removed and emptied, kept the water from the melting ice from dripping down onto the floor. Some of the bigger ice boxes could hold 100 pounds of ice, but typically a regular household's ice box would only hold up to 25 pounds of ice. A typical block of ice would last between 3 and 4 days, depending on the temperature outside the box and how often the door was opened. The icebox was invented in 1802 and was in popular use ever since the mid-1800s until the mid-30s. Even then, the electric refrigerator didn't see widespread usage in rural American homes until the mid to late 40s. In the early 1900s, even the cheaper models were around $15, around $575 in today's money. This is not taking into account how much ice for the icebox would cost, a frequent recurring expense. But for a two-person household, one where maybe I don't use the full pint of milk we get delivered, where we often have leftovers, in a house that doesn't have a root cellar to keep things cool and doesn't have the land to raise animals so I can't get any of that fresh unless I go to the market every day, an icebox would be very much worth the expense. But because of the size and kind of iceboxes I would have been able to afford, I would still have much favored shelf-stable items and probably would still try to get my milk, meat, and butter fresh as often as possible. Even with iceboxes, the standard diet for the rural poor was very similar to the diets of those who came before them. Usually this was largely whatever they could grow or raise themselves, and whatever they could trade or buy from local farmers and merchants. Luckily for me, I happen to live in the second greatest agricultural producer in the country. Flour, corn, oats, and soybeans would have been widely available year-round in their dried states, and they would have been pretty cheap too. Pork and chicken, as well as eggs and milk, would have been common staples in the household. The milk would be delivered fresh daily by the milkman, since I don't live way out in the sticks anymore. And a large variety of fruits and vegetables, though their availability would depend on the season. Even though refrigerated transportation meant that produce grown all over the states, territories, and countries we trade with could have been available to me, this produce would have been much more expensive. So for the winter, it'll be lots of potatoes, onions, squash, and dried, pickled, and jellied fruits and veggies. White sugar is an interesting subject historically, but we're more concerned with the real-life significance for this project. So I'll try to give a brief rundown. From the birth of the nation up until the Civil War, nearly 100 years, white sugar averaged around 12 cents per pound. Depending on the time period, that could be around $4 per pound today. Spiking up to 30 cents per pound after the Napoleonic Wars and during the Civil War, $12.40 per pound as opposed to $4. After the Civil War, white sugar prices dropped and continued to drop until the 1920s, reaching a low point of around 3 cents per pound in the mid-1900s, roughly $1 per pound today. By the 1900s, white sugar was cheap enough to be widely available to most Americans. However, ever since the Civil War, and in some areas before it as well, the American South had been significantly poorer than the northern counterparts. This means that many Southerners turned to cheaper sweeteners, usually byproducts of white sugar production, that being unrefined sugar or brown sugar, as well as molasses. Sorghum was also a very common sweetener in the South, along with honey. The use of alternative sweeteners was particularly popular in African American cooking, as after being free, these people found it difficult to find work and often couldn't afford white sugar even when the prices had fallen. And of course, traditional African American cuisine is at the heart of Southern cuisine. So while during this time white sugar was finally affordable, traditional Southern cooking still favored alternatives to a large extent, especially molasses and sorghum. So for me, white sugar would be used for canning and the occasional sweet recipe, but most of my cooking, baking, and sweetening of drinks would have been done with either molasses or brown sugar or some combination of these and white sugar. Sweetening would often be done with fruit too, such as raisins and fruit juice. But if I was in the mood for something sweet and was too busy in my regular life to bake something up, The wonders of modern food production technology will have something in store for me. This time, while not the beginning of processed foods, is at the dawn of what we know today as ultra-processed foods. Cracker Jacks, chewing gum, corn flakes, and Nabisco sugar wafers were a few of the highly processed treats widely available to Americans at the time. Admittedly, I have a major sweet tooth and adore candied nuts and popcorn. So while gum and packaged cookies don't interest me too much, Cracker Jacks would have found their place in my cupboard among a small handful of ready-to-eat shelf-stable food items such as crackers and canned soup. Ultra-processed foods, while today are considered the downfall of the American palate and waistline, had a sensible beginning. They were originally made to improve food quality, safety, and convenience. Crackers were scooped out of a barrel and quickly went stale. Unrefrigerated soup is dangerous and is kind of hard to make just a small amount at a time. In the days when every little thing had to be made from scratch and carefully planned out beforehand, who wouldn't want to just grab a package of cookies or Cracker Jacks when you just need something sweet? When it comes to cultural cuisine, I did come from a very German Catholic background. However, the sentiment of my family and the families of many European immigrants was, we are in America now, we are Americans, we act like Americans. Unfortunately, this means that much of our German culture was left in Germany, including many elements of German cuisine. While we still enjoy our pretzels and Braunschweiger and the occasional bratwurst and pickled herring, German families largely adopted the diets of the areas they immigrated to or adapted old recipes with local ingredients, both out of pride for their new American citizen status and practicality, as it was pretty hard to find stuff like fresh herring to pickle or poach in Missouri before refrigeration. This general rejection of German culture and hiding of German ethnicity would be particularly common among German immigrants and their descendants during and after World War I and World War II for obvious reasons. All this helps to explain why, despite having such a large amount of German American citizenry, even in the most German of areas, you'd be hard-pressed to find traditional German cooking or even a German-style restaurant or even any elements of German culture in general. Even in such German restaurants, their cuisine has been changed to a distinctly American version of traditional German foods. Typically soft pretzels served with cheese, 10 slightly different choices of brats and sauerkraut, 1 or 2 different kinds of schnitzel, potato salad, usually not the German potato salad, and hamburgers, which have little to do with Hamburg, Germany. All this to say that even in times when it was safe to openly participate in German culture, due to the limited availability of ingredients, general German immigrant sensibilities, and the whims of American taste, authentic German cuisine would not find strong footholding in America, even amongst German immigrants, let alone their descendants. So my diet, despite coming from a very heavily German area, would not be very German itself, but would rather reflect the standard diet of low-income Midwest peoples, that being mostly influenced by Southern cuisine, but with more wheat flour and being made up of whatever local agriculture can produce, with the occasional echo of European cuisine, particularly German, Scandinavian, French, and Irish. To help make sure my diet isn't too bland and my meals not too repetitive, I have been using cookbooks for my collection that are either themed or printed from the years 1909 and earlier. So far, it's been a lot of salt pork, read bacon, chicken, white fish, white sauce, eggs, and molasses everything. I've gone through more molasses this year than I have my entire life. Bread, butter, and milk find their way into every other dish at least, and onions, carrots, and celery reign supreme when it comes to vegetables. With the winter approaching and my savory recipes dwindling, I expect this to change somewhat, especially since most fruits and vegetables I have been eating will be out of season. Typically, a winter diet would be very meat-heavy due to the fresh slaughter and hunting season, and most of your produce would be potatoes, squashes, cabbage, onions, and apples, as these would be able to be kept in the cellar for the winter months. Throughout the year, you would put up any extra produce, and winter would be when you ate it. But right now, we are still in the late growing season, and we are gearing up for the sweet, sweet fall festival season. So what might a day's worth of meals look like? My breakfast is a bowl of oatmeal with some dried fruits and nuts. These you see here are dried cherries, though raisins, currants, or other dried fruit would have been common also. The nuts in here are pecans, but of course any nuts or seeds you could get your hands on would work. Pepitas, otherwise known as whole pumpkin seeds, would be especially fitting for the season, but I don't like those all that much. For lunch, I have a ham and cheese sandwich and some chunks of cheese with apples. Lunches are typically much smaller, more casual of your meals. If you worked close to home or had your own business, you would typically come home for lunch. Otherwise, you packed your own, or if you worked in a more urban area, you might go into a restaurant, diner, or other eatery for your lunch break. Lunches were typically a sandwich or something that was portable and easy to assemble. For dinner tonight, I made bean soup. If you were still cooking using a fire, like most people were back in the day, you would typically prepare the soup starting around midday and let it slowly simmer throughout the day, which I did. However, when you didn't have refrigeration and couldn't eat all the soup in one go, what you might have done was keep it over the cooling coals after putting out the fire and left it there overnight. The soup would then be reheated with the restarting of the fire in the morning, and you would typically eat it for breakfast and throughout the day. I just used my fridge though. I will not be risking food poisoning for the sake of this project. I'm sorry.